Some people get confused between 6-bed and 6 persons. The actual legislation from a HMO perspective is 6 persons. You could have 6-bedroom HMO, but have it occupied by 8 persons, and you would need full planning and permission to change it to a sui generis use class.
The most important figures we look at when it's solely HMOs, we always want to target a minimum of 20% return on cash left in, which is quite typical in a high capital value area. We also then want to see over 10% return on equity. The reason that's got to be over 10% is because if you're not getting 10%, it's a poor return on the equity that is opportunity cost. We're going to be first off going through the deep dive questions that were thrown at Ben. I don't think he had time to do the whole review of the deal because there was so much engagement, which is really good. And thank you everyone for their questions. XCRI is, can you outline key compliance, planning and licensing activities when converting a 4-bed house into a 6-bedroom HMO in a non-Article 4 area for pre-acquisition through to post?
Pre-acquisition through to project completion. I mean, that's the whole big topic in itself, isn't it? Key compliance, planning and licensing activities. I guess ultimately, from a planning perspective, if it's a non-Article 4 area, then technically you do not need planning approval to go from a 4-bedroom to a 6-bedroom. And that's what's known as going from C3 residential use class to C4, which is a HMO up to 6 persons. And this is actually something that is quite key to say, is that a property becomes a sui generis HMO when it's above 6 persons. I think some people get confused between 6-bed and 6 persons. The actual legislation from a HMO perspective is 6 persons. You could have 6-bedroom HMO, but have it occupied by 8 persons, and you would need full planning and permission to change it to a sui generis use class. Don't get confused between a bedroom HMO and a person, 6-bedroom HMO and a 6-person HMO.
Yeah. I would actually say, for me, it's actually really simple. 4-bed to 6-bed. On my first one, if XCRI, this is your first one, I would pay for the HMO officer consultation, which is 125 quid for them to do 2 visits. You've got to pay it twice. But I'd get them out when you've just bought it, tell them what you want to do, and they'll kind of rebuttal problems there and then so you can redesign accordingly. And I would also get a fire engineer involved. Everything else, like building control, actual detailed design, tender and stuff, you can figure out as you go. But those 2 things that I'd probably would say are the biggest things that would make you come unstuck.
Licensing is always going to be very area specific. Some areas will have mandatory licensing even above 3 persons, so you'll have to check your local guidance in terms of licensing. I think there's often a common misconception between all of the different parties that you're talking about here. The licensing team, they don't speak to the planning department, and the planning department don't speak to building regulation department. They are 3 independent bodies, and they each have their own requirements, and there are times where you won't require planning, but you do require licensing. And there'll be times where you do require planning, but you don't require a license. Likewise, there are times where building control is going to be more of an issue than not. So there are lots of things to consider, depending on your location, depending on the amount of work you're doing as well to convert. It can sometimes depend on how much work you're doing to the property. Like if you're completely gutting something and then repurposing it, building control might ask for more robust work. So they might actually ask you to upgrade the thermal fabric of the building, because I think the regulation states something like if you are changing 25% of the area of an external wall, then they expect you to upgrade it to the latest Part L U value requirements, for example. So there's loads of nuances. Obviously, this is property, so there are huge amounts of nuance in everything that you do, and having the right team on board, your planning consultants, your architects, your fire engineers, that's why you need those specialists on board with the projects that you work on.
Next question is...
Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, this video has probably been pulled from one of our live video broadcasts where we show insights into our 6, 7 and 8-figure businesses. We're live every week showing the inner workings of our business, sharing tips, templates and strategies that you can take away and use in your own business to help you grow and be more profitable. If you've not checked it out yet, head over to the live section on our YouTube channel where you can see all of the back catalogue of videos where we cover everything that you need to be a successful entrepreneur and a property developer. Back to the video.
When converting a house to a 6-bed HMO, what construction and layout factors do you assess, e.g. GIA, layout, window count? Do you use any software or internal methods for quick feasibility?
For me, obviously you need a window in every habitable room. That is probably the big one. I always look at where the soil stacks are running, because that becomes a pain in the ass if you've got to run a soil stack to the back of a building. The way that we typically have a cookie cutter model is we always put the kitchen living space at the very rear of the house, so into the garden. garden, obviously has a benefit of the garden. And then you almost have a fire safety stair core at the front in between the two bedrooms that run all the way up. So that's our typical layout. It's quite easy to deliver. You normally have a 2.5-story house, convert a loft, 2 bedrooms in a loft, 2 bedrooms on the first, 2 bedrooms on the ground floor, and then you have a large kitchen diner at the back, which is kind of exclusive to any fire issues if people are sleeping. Obviously, the people that are in the kitchen can go out into the garden if there's the event of a fire.
You mentioned the soil stacks. Like if you can stack en suites, you're going to make your lives a lot easier. So on the ground floor, if you're utilizing the front, what was a living room, and turning that into a bedroom, for example, and installing an ensuite on the sort of spine wall in the middle, then you can probably do a similar thing on the first floor front bedroom where your ensuites are stacked. You've got a soil stack that just literally drops straight down from first floor down to ground floor in the same location. Your design of that ensuite is probably going to be exactly the same. Once one of your builders has done one of the ensuites, he's going to be super fast in doing the second one and know where things go and where the towel radiator goes and what tile setting out he's going to be using and this sort of stuff. So you're just going to speed up the process and make it cheaper for yourself by stacking ensuites where you can. Always going to be possible.
Not just stacking, back to backing them as well, because if you have 2 rooms next door to each other, that's also really, really useful. We've got a project in Wallingford at the moment, and it's so tight to get 5 bedrooms. We're building the landing and the stair core first, and then we're just going on site and going to measure it all up on site, because it's literally going to be millimeters to get the rooms big enough to make sure that we can get 5 in.
If you get value from these videos, imagine what we could do for your business with more one-to-one coaching. Now, we've spent over £100,000 on training, business coaching, non-exec directors, and we love sharing that information with our mentees. Click one of the links in the description to find out more. Back to the video.
I see it as a game of Tetris. For me, it's like I've got my blocks of an ensuite. I know I can use this type of format, this type of format. I can do a square one that's maybe 1.8 by 1.8. I can do a long one that's maybe 2.4 meters by 900 wide in depth. Those are my blocks. This is my bedrooms. Where do I squeeze in all of those different Tetris blocks and make it as efficient without any holes as possible? Slash Windows Cambridge company again. What design or spec features have you found most effective in increasing rent levels for HMO rooms? E.g. ensuites, kitchenettes, no oven/hob, basins, USB ports, or built-in Ethernet. I think there's a lot of things that probably actually don't make a massive difference, but help them let faster and make a better product for people, but maybe potentially negligible in terms of actual, does a USB port in a bedroom add any rent?
Probably not. We do it just because it's like we're doing back to brick construction, right? So for us to spend an extra £8 a corner in a bedroom, it's not really going to touch the size on your construction costs. So I'd highly recommend ensuites as many as you can, especially with the new legislation that's came in to say that there's not going to be banding for private HMOs. I would say hobs or kitchenettes is a good question. I personally would only consider it if the rooms are over 15 meters squared. I think once they're smaller than that, you're kind of really pushing the boundaries of like terrible accommodation and when someone's cooking next to their pillow. But again, do your homework on that. But we just stick with just ensuites. We do fit USB ports and we do try and get really fast Wi-Fi.
Yeah, most people nowadays want that speed. I think the biggest one is ensuite. Like you said, like we always have this conversation. Like there's been times in some of our flats from a design perspective where I could get a larger bedroom and one ensuite, or I could get an extra bedroom out of that large size bedroom. And you have one smaller bedroom but it has an ensuite, but you have an extra bedroom itself. So instead of it being maybe £900 a month, you're then getting 2 units, which are one's maybe £650 and the other one's £750. Well, you've already increased things by £500 there by having the 2 bedrooms and making a larger bedroom into 2 smaller ones. But if you can get ensuites in, I do think in certainly in our areas they probably add £75 at least per month, maybe £100.
The way I see an ensuite is even more than that. Like a non-ensuite in our accommodation is like 750 to 800, and you're going to get 850 to 950 for an ensuite. So if you work out that's just like £100, and you work that out per month, so that you're basically then going to get an extra 1,200 per year. And during construction, ensuites shouldn't cost more than a few grand, so it's paid off in a couple of years. It also boosts your yield valuation or gives you a bit of a chance for your valuation to go up. So yeah, all the way along, all the suites you can.
So there's a few more questions coming in. What returns do you look for on HMOs? Please share a breakdown from gross to net, including all costs and the actual cash return to you after maintenance, bills, voids, mortgage, investor payments. In terms of returns, I mean, we from a gross yield perspective, we want somewhere between like 8 to 10% in the areas that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really even look at gross yield. So the most important figures we look at when it's solely HMOs is slightly different when Ben and I are doing HMOs in our developments. We always want to target a minimum of 20% return on cash left in, which is quite typical in a high capital value area. We also then want to see over 10% return on equity. So the equity is the profit if you were to sell it when you finished it. The reason that's got to be over 10% is because if you're not getting 10%, it's a poor return on the equity that is opportunity cost. We also want to see a minimum hurdle of 1K across the house or flat. That just enables you're not doing really, really small deals, because we've had some HMOs that hit the hurdles of 20% return on cash, 10% return on equity, but it's like 600, 700 quid net. And it's just not worth all the aggro of all the legal work in building that in. That's pretty much it, to be fair, because once you have those metrics dialed down, it kind of does the talking for everything else. So you know it's good enough size to warrant you doing it. You're making a minimum 1K net per month. You know that if you've brought in investor money at 10, 12%, it can sustain that because your income's 20% on cash left in, and you know that your money that's stuck in is going up in value as well. And then one other thing is we just stress test it so that if interest rates go up a couple of percent, it still cash flows, and that's pretty much it, to be fair.
If I were to take one of our 5-bed HMOs in Abingdon, we get about 3.5 grand rental income a month, and our net after that is about 1,400 quid. So, we're basically netting 40% of our gross. So that's inclusive of maintenance bills, voids, mortgage payments. So yeah, netting about 40% of our gross income.
If you got value from this video, make sure you click the subscribe button down below and ring the notification bell, because we release one video at least every week, so you'll be the first to get notified. See you on the next one.